Dylan Schumacher, Citadel Defense. Welcome back to another episode of Knight Rider. If you are new here, this is where we slow down. We do some long form content. We try to ponder and think. We want to philosophize a bit, right? This isn't a wham bam thank you ma'am kind of video. This is a sit and stare off into space and enjoy the solitude and the deep thoughts kind of video. So if you're into that, this is probably for you. If you are a Neanderthal and don't like thinking, then I don't know, maybe this isn't for you as much, right? Towards the fall of the Roman Republic, which I know that you're a man like me, and so you think about Rome every day, right? But before you get to Caesar, you kind of the first event that happens is the Gracchus brothers, which we're skipping past all that. But before you have Caesar, the generation before, you have his, I think it's his uncle by marriage maybe. It's Gaius Marius. And he reformats the entire Roman army. He defeats the Celtic hordes that were threatening Rome at that point. He does a lot. Pretty important, large figure. And as Mr. Marius is nearing the end of his life, he gets into conflict for a variety of reasons, which we're not going to cover here, with a guy named Sulla. I don't remember what Sulla's first or middle name is, but Sulla is his last name. It's how we refer to him in history, Sulla. And Sulla and Marius fight some battles in a civil war that basically racks all of Rome. And at the end, Sulla is victorious. And Sulla does something interesting where he issues these, I think they're called prescription lists. And he issues these publicly posted lists. And if your name was on that list, your life was forfeit. All of your property was forfeit. Like if your name appeared on that list, anyone could kill you. And it was not, legally speaking, murder, right? And that was the end. Sulla killed a lot of people through his prescription lists and through his general, reign of terror, kind of tyrannical thing. One of the names on that list was a young man that Sulla wanted to kill, and someone talked him out of putting his name on that list. And Sulla said, fine, we don't have to put his name on the list, but I tell you, something to the effect of, within that man are 1,000 Gaius Mariuses. And that was Julius Caesar, right? Whose name you probably know. You probably have a rough idea of Caesar and who he was. And I hope not. I hope so. If not, you need to listen to more like History of Rome or the Hardcore History guy. Even though they're both kind of left of center guys, which is a sad deal, but different story. So Sulla goes on this reign of terror. Sulla goes on this reign of terror so much that by the end of his life, he dies old and peacefully. And I don't know if he dies actually in bed, but he doesn't even walk around Rome with a bodyguard. Just a guy hanging out because he's killed everyone who would oppose him. Sulla tries to set up the Republic before he dies. He tries to say, look, we're going back to the Republic. We fought these civil wars. Things have been falling apart. He limits how many people can be in the Senate. He establishes a bunch of rules for how people need to operate. Like, he tries to set up a structure. Like, we're going back to the Republic. Okay? By that point, though, the next generation of people, the Caesars, the Pompeys, they all saw how the system really worked, right? They saw, well, if you want power, you just got to take it. And if you want to take it, you need an army that's loyal to you. Simple as, right? There's this famous quote by Pompey, who, by the way, under Sulla, he earned this nickname, the Butcher. Probably not for good reasons. And there's this quote by Pompey where he's doing something, I don't remember the context, some of you might, and someone says to him something to the effect of, you can't do that, that's illegal. And he says, why do you quote the law to us who have swords? Right? Might makes right. Right? That's what he learned as a young man in his 20s. Well, you take what you want. And as long as you have more power than the other person, you can get what you want. That's what Sulla taught me. That's what Gaius Marius taught me. That's what growing up I learned. The law doesn't mean anything. The traditions don't mean anything. The republic means even less. What matters is power and those who can seize it. And again, if you have the armies and you have the skill and you have the money, well, then you can have the power. So I bring that up because, there's been talk of like the American Caesar, right? And is Trump the American Caesar? And, you've probably seen this batted around a couple times, here and there on the interwebs. And I think that's interesting because everybody loves to reference Caesar. Nobody likes to reference Sulla. But before we got a Caesar, we had a Sulla. And so I don't wonder, or I do wonder, I was trying to use a double negative there, I think I said that incorrectly. I do wonder if there comes a time when the next thing up for the American system is not a Caesar, but it's a Sulla. I don't know. I guess there's two theories in my mind of the way that this whole thing could go, right? So after Charlie Kirk died, there was a strong yearning for justice in America. And the government, particularly at the federal level, did absolutely nothing to procure said justice. Nothing. Right? Like they did nothing. They did not do any kind of actual adjustment enforcement. And you could say, well, hold on, Dylan. I mean, they designated Antifa as a terrorist organization. They caught Charlie Kirk's killer. The FBI is out there working hard for the American people. If you believe that the federal government is working hard to secure justice for you, then good luck with that. I think that at this point, they blew their window of opportunity. They had a window of opportunity to enforce real justice. There was the killing right before Charlie Kirk was murdered of that white Ukrainian girl in the train, I believe, in South Carolina, North Carolina, right? I think her name was Ileana. Ooh, I could be wrong on that. I apologize. But that event and Charlie Kirk's murder are just seared into my mind because you have these brazen anarcho-tyranny kind of murders and there's no justice done. There's no hope that justice would be done. These people are not in prison. They're not being executed. They're not being arrested. They're not, right? It's always when something really bad happens, it's some guy who's arrested 12, 20, 30 times. Those aren't like made up exaggerated numbers either. And no justice was ever done. And so they just keep doing it. And when you have a justice-starved people, a people like us that can't find justice from those who are supposed to be issuing the justice, our government, right? That's the reason. Government should seek the welfare of its people. A government primarily does that by enforcing justice and punishing evil. Okay, that's my basic framework of how government should work. I pull that from Romans chapter 13, verse 4, in case you want to do some further reading. I also just think that makes general common sense, right? That's what you want to do. So if a government doesn't do that, and ours doesn't, I think that's fairly self-evident. If I have to make an argument for that, this video might not be the one for you. Well, one, we can argue about if that's a legitimate, fair, right government or not. That's a second set of discussion that we're not talking about right now. But my question is, so what happens then? When you have a government so clearly and blatantly ignore justice, and not just ignore justice, but a government that was established and elected a year ago on the very promise of bringing said justice, right? Like that was it. That was the last great hope, right? Was we were going to vote all these Republicans in, and they were going to deport millions of illegal immigrants. They were going to Make America Great Again round 2, and they were going to really establish justice. And you had Trump coming in here, and they convicted him of all these felonies, and they tried to kill him, and they tried to do everything they could to destroy his life for 4 years. And it still just feels like he's playing softball, just kind of like a beer league, softball league. Like nothing's really getting taken too seriously here. We're still going to bring in the H-1B visas, and because Americans can't learn to make computer chips or something. And we're still going to, generally just run things as usual or pretend things are normal. And you have Kash Patel in charge of the FBI talking very firmly about how the FBI works hard for Americans, but can't even release the Epstein files. Which, as of yesterday, I don't know, the House voted to release some information's coming out now. I don't know, I haven't followed that too closely, I'll be honest. So, what happens then? What happens to a people in a nation where there's no justice? And in my mind, I think it goes one of two ways. The first option is, which honestly I think is probably the most likely, is the federal government just slowly loses its power, its reach, its influence, right? So you have places like New York City that just elected Mamdi, and I think as of today, which I'm filming this on November 22nd, the Mamdi went to the White House and told President Trump that when he becomes mayor here and gets installed, that they will not allow ICE to arrest any illegal immigrants anymore. Right? You have the mayor of a city, granted, one of our largest cities, but a city, going to the President of the United States and telling him to take a hike. Nope, your law is no good here. Your justice is no good here. Can't do it here. Not even a governor, just a mayor. You have California, who's done its own thing for quite a while. And you have this increasing balkanization thing, where more and more primarily left-leaning people who actually understand power and how to use power are just telling the federal government, no, we're not going to do it. The Chicago, you've seen all the ICE videos coming out of Chicago where they're trying to arrest people. The Chicago PD was intentionally told to stand down and ignore ICE trying to arrest people and not come to their aid and assistance, right? So you have these instances more and more and more where people are not not helping, where people are just saying, look, we're not going to do it. I'm not going to submit to the federal government's law. And I think that will increase. I think that's the most common thing. And that'll come primarily from the left. You could only hope that someone on the right would do it. But all the current right leadership, right, is we gotta obey the law, and we gotta follow the Constitution, and we can't be like those liberals who just ignore the law, and we must enforce the law of the land and the Constitution, and we must be consistent, and this kind of thing. But in the meantime, the communists just use your own morality against you and know that you will submit to the law while they can ignore the law so they can crush you. All right, it's the typical playbook. So the next generation of right-wing leadership, what do you get? I think you get a Sulla, you know? I think you get a Franco. I think you get a person who just takes the gloves off and says, you know what? Enough's enough. Like, I don't care. You can quote the law to me. You can tell me what's legal. You can tell me what's not. But it doesn't matter because I've seen who you are and I've seen what you do. And I've grown up in a world where you just continually abuse everyone. And so we're done with that. Now, the morality of that aside, whether or not you think that's good and right and finally and like vindictive, or you feel like, oh my God, that's terrifying, we're not even dealing with that. I'm just saying, look, what is the historical outcome? Based on what we've looked at in human history, what's the most likely route that we go? And I think if you get any kind of major right-wing pushback to evil, I think it comes in the form of a Sulla. I think you get a Sulla before you get a Caesar. I think it comes in the form of a guy who just finally has had enough and he just doesn't care. These people don't come from a vacuum. You don't get a Sulla out of nowhere, right? When you have these inflection points in history where things are just so unbelievably screwed up, they're just so depraved or degraded, or people are so downcast or downtrodden or so full of anger at the absolute injustice, or they're just so tired of having a boot on their neck and feeling like there's no hope. And then someone invariably comes along and says, I'll give you some hope. I'll give you some courage. I'll give you some spine. I'll give you some reasons to live. I will show you how we can get out of this. Now, whether or not that person's successful, that's a different story, right? You look at the Jewish revolts under the Romans in the 1st century AD and before that, and they don't go well. They don't win. They lose. They lose badly. The sack of Jerusalem is a pretty brutal thing. I think it's something like close to 1 million people die. You might have to fact check me on that. But it's a lot of people, is my point, okay? And it doesn't go well, right? Like, I'm not saying that a Sulla figure comes and is successful every time. But I am saying that all of that is fertile ground for a Sulla or a Franco, right? That's a fertile ground for that person to just come out of nowhere. And there are reasons that people back figures like that, right? There's a reason that people are like, finally, oh, thank God. Now, again, you can agree that that's immoral or wrong or whatever, but what I'm telling you is understanding the psychology, the group, social psychology, the psychology of the people at large, that gets you there is what we're talking about here. Like that, when the people are that justice starved and someone else finally comes along and says, I'll give you justice and I will give it to you immediately and brutally and I will make it palpable to you so that you will be vindicated, that you will be heartened, that you will know that evil does not live here. And I will freely distribute justice liberally, with vigor. People say, yeah, that sounds good to me. That's what people say. Again, right, wrong, or indifferent, this is just a historical reality. So I think that person will come. Whether or not they're successful, whether or not it's at a large federal level, right? I think you could have a Sulla type character who's just the governor of a state and just says, again, whoever Mr. Democrat elected president who now wants us to do all these insane things, we're just not going to do it here. No. Thanks, but no thanks. Your federal troops aren't allowed here. Essentially what the liberals do now. That could happen. In that degree, to that extent, I hope it happens, right? Like, again, you can't, when you're playing by a different rule book than the other person, it doesn't really make a very fair game. So, knowing that, or at least maybe knowing's too strong of a word, believing that that is where things will likely go in our lifetime. What does that really mean for you? What does that look like for you? We've talked about the balkanization of America for some time. I say we generally here, not just me, but people, if you're to the right of center on things, I'm sure you've heard this term. I'm sure you've thought about it. I'm sure you who are watching this video have talked about it yourself. And this idea that as things continue to dilapidate, the country will balkanize, and different states and localities and municipalities will bind together to form new coalitions or alliances or whatever, states, and then the nation will be fractured, right? And that makes sense. America is geographically a very large place. You have to remember it's the third largest nation in the world by land mass and by population size. Like, it is a massive country. America is not a small place. If you grew up here and you've only ever lived here, you don't really think of it that way because to you it's just normal. But I'm telling you, America is an anomaly, right? Most nations in the world, I don't know how many there are, 252, 217, however many there are, I don't know. Much smaller than America, right? I would bet the average is somewhere in like the 50 million people mark, maybe even that's a little high. And that might only be skewed by the top three. If you took out China, India, and America for populations and then just calculated the average population of each nation after that, I'd be real curious what that number is. I would also be curious what the average land size is. So, leave a comment and inform us all. So it's not normal to be this big. And then, we've talked about this before ad nauseum, right? But on top of that, you have all these nation-ending issues that we have, the severe multiculturalism, the severe illegal immigration, the severe debt. Like, all of those are just like nation enders in and of themselves, culturally speaking, physically speaking. We have them all. So at some point, the bill's going to come due for one or all of those. And so again, I think that's all fertile ground for a Sulla. What do you do with that? Or at least, if there is going to be some kind of right-wing reaction or pushback, it'll be a Sulla-like character, right? A character who's not interested in what the letters of the law are anymore. They're not interested in what we're legally allowed to do. They're like a president who becomes president and the next day orders bulldozers in to bulldoze the FBI building and salts the earth. Like that kind of person. They're like, oh, you can't do that. The FBI hasn't been officially disbanded. It's like, yeah, that's great, but actually they all work for me, so I'm just going to fire them all. I don't care. They're fired. And we're demolishing the building on Tuesday. So that's it. The FBI can still exist. It'll be Frank. He can have an office in the basement level C of this federal building here, and that's it. That's the FBI now. It's Frank. Could do that. That would be a Sulla-like character to me. Someone who's willing to just take extreme measures, and they do the same with the Department of Education, right? And all the other. We could go on a list of how many government organizations that are destroying America that should be on that list, but I think that's what you get, or you get nothing. You get someone who tries maybe, but just isn't successful. Could happen too. But for you and me, just normal everyday people, What does that really mean? Chances are, if you're watching this, you're not the Sulla. I mean, maybe you are. You're not necessarily going to be the character that is able to affect things on a macro level. Probably. Maybe you are. But you can probably affect things on a local level. You know? You could probably run for mayor of your local town of 15,000 people. You could probably be in a place where you could balkanize, train with your boys, and be prepared for when things get a little bit more kinetic, chaotic. Because I think that as governments recede, and again, this is just historical reality, right, wrong, or indifferent, historical reality, as governments recede, you always see a rise in banditry. Historical reality, since we've left the Garden of Eden, where there is no order and there is no justice, there is evil. And where there is evil, there is increased banditry and home invasions and all that kind of thing. It's just reality. And I think it's not something you necessarily should live in terror of. It's something you should understand. Okay, if as things degrade, if we get a Sulla, if we don't, I think that means something like to emotionally, mentally deal with it now and just understand that, okay, well, the communist, communist Muslim mayor guy getting elected in New York isn't a defect. It's not shocking. It's not like, oh, how did we get here? It's just part of the plan. It's just how things go. It's just well, yeah, actually that checks out, because we're continuing to degrade down this line where the federal government becomes less and less relevant. Hopefully we all can just stop paying them taxes soon so they stop stealing your money. And that's, I think, where it feels tough, right? You get that crunch in the middle where you're still having to obey this federal government thing because they'll ruin your life, and you're getting the anarcho-tyranny, and you're getting oppressed by the thugs in the street, and you just feel like you're squeezed in the middle. Because the thugs don't obey the law. They don't care. They keep committing crimes and getting out of jail. It's no big deal there. But you, who saved your money, and you've paid your taxes, and you've lived in the suburbs, and you mow your lawn, you try to be a good general person and neighbor and citizen, you get punished the most, right? And you feel that, and that builds a deep anger. All right, that builds a deep frustration. So I think it means you balkanize. I think it means you establish lots of good friends. I think it means you try to get your eggs from a farmer that lives within a 20-mile radius of you, and you find a good raw milk hookup. Maybe a person who butchers some pigs or some chickens or some turkeys or some cattle. You try to localize your sources of food as much as you can. I think all those are good things. And you should do those. I do those, right? But at the end of the day, I don't think this is about as much prepping and building social connections. Well, important, not bad things to do. As much as it's just you have to understand what time it is. And I don't just mean understand what time it is. Yes, Dylan, I intellectually assent to the fact that things are going downhill and they're going bad, right? I have some relatives that I can't talk to about politics anymore. Not because we disagree, but because we agree. And I'll say that. I'll say, the America you grew up in no longer exists. And they're like, yeah, it's pretty bad. But they haven't internalized it. They don't, it hasn't gone from an intellectual grasping of how bad it is to a heartfelt belief of how bad it is. And I've just found that I can't talk to them about it anymore. Not because they don't agree with me, but because it just doesn't feel like they get it. They just don't get it yet. And you're watching this, you probably get it, right? You probably understand that on a deep, heartfelt belief, this isn't the same. Sorry. I gotta find a way to change the setting on this camera. It times out after 30 minutes. I don't know how to film longer than 30 minutes. It isn't the same. the America that you grew up in isn't the same anymore. You got to internalize that. You have to believe that at your core level. It has to be a core memory for you, And I think that's really hard. That's really hard for a lot of people. It's really hard to fully internalize. They hate you. They hate you. They want you to die. They would mock your death like they mocked Charlie Kirk's. They actively seek for your destruction through government policies or local city ordinances or propaganda on various social internet platforms. They hate you. And I think you just have to internalize that. I don't think it means you need to live in fear or be angry about it even. I just think it means you need to understand that's where we're at. They want to end you and your entire bloodline and your entire way of life. And that's what a Mamdi of New York wants to do, right? They want to import people who are not you, who hate you, who want to destroy you. And I think until you believe that on a core level, I just don't know if you'll be equipped mentally to understand where we're at. And I think you constantly can get emotionally worked up and be like, oh my gosh, this is so shocking. Oh my gosh, this is so shocking. Can you believe this? And I can't believe they said that. And you're constantly saying that because it's just all so crazy. But it's not. It's not crazy. It's not crazy not because it's not wrong. It is wrong. But it's not crazy because if you've understood and internalized the fact that they're looking for your destruction, well, then actually it's just par for the course. It just makes sense. Doesn't mean you should accept it. Doesn't mean you should be okay with it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't make noise about it. Doesn't mean that Dearborn, Michigan, which is another great example of balkanization, right? If you look at Dearborn, Michigan, you have this town in Michigan that's essentially like a Muslim-run town. It's like the Saudi Arabia of the Midwest, right? And it's the police department is majority Muslim. The mayor and city council is they're enforcing some form of Sharia law. It's really bad, right? It's really bad. It's hardly even America anymore. A great example of balkanization, right? Where they're just gonna ignore the federal government and do what they want. Great example of a leftist Sulla, right? But as you see places like that, you can say, oh, yeah, that's not the America I grew up in. And you have to understand that they want the Dearborn, Michigans. They want to turn your town into a Dearborn, Michigan, or a Mamdi, New York, or whatever. So I would invite you to internalize that. Think about it, where we're going, where we're at, the historical, I call them inevitabilities, right? And to really make your decisions and live in light of that. It doesn't mean you should be scared. It doesn't mean you should be nervous, although it is scary. Getting ground in the gears of history is one of my biggest fears. I think about the people who lived in Poland in about 1938. And in 1939, Germany and Russia invade Poland from opposite ends, meet in the middle, right? Bisect the entire nation. The Poles get pretty crushed. Then World War II happens, Let's say you're in West Poland. So you're ruled by the Nazis for 5 or 6 years. They a lot of problems there. The Nazis fairly famously hated the Eastern peoples. Then the Russians sweep through and, sweet liberation, except not. Now you live as part of the Soviet communist bloc for the next 50, 75 years. That's tough. Oh, that's tough. You're just ground in the gears of history, right? And you're just screwed no matter what. That terrifies me. I don't like that idea. I don't want to get ground in the gears of history. But if my time comes, I pray that I die valiantly and with honor and with some respect. But sometimes that's just the hand you're dealt. You want, like it or love it or hate it, it doesn't really matter. That's just the lot that God has for you. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, He's doing things that are above and beyond you. This is not about you and your personal happiness in the moment. But sometimes it's just above you and it's beyond you. And there's a lot of things in the world you can't control. And so I think you don't need to live in fear of it. You don't need to live in trepidation. You just need to understand what it is so you're not so emotionally volatile over it. You're not letting it run you and rule you. But you're doing what you can when you can to make it, you know? And you're preparing with your boys, and you're going shooting on the weekends to train, and you're building relationships with people that you like and that are like-minded, and you're trying to buy your eggs local, like we said, and you know, you're doing the stuff, right? And you're getting the things. And yeah, okay, you can store some beans and rice. That's nothing wrong with that. But I think if you're going to let the fear of the moment drive you, you're going to buy a chest rig from me because it's the best chest rig. Sorry, had to at least put one plug in here during the whole deal. If you're going to let the fear drive you, then I think you've already lost. You've already let them win. So don't let the fear drive you. Don't let it rule you. But just realize where you're at. Don't let it give you emotional whiplash all the time. But how insane it is today, because it's always pretty bad. But just have a patient determination that you're going to do what you can when you can. And maybe that means you're going to run for governor in your state. Maybe that means you're going to go to your job and give your wife a kiss and hug your kids really hard. I don't know. I don't know what that means for you. You have to determine that, not me. So, I hope this wasn't too depressing. You know, we live in depressing times. I don't want the musings to be depressing. I don't think it should end there. I don't think we should end in everything sucks and we're all going to die. Like, okay, everything does suck, and eventually you will die, one way or another. But what happens in the in-between, I mean, that's on you, right? It's that very famous quote by Mr. Frodo to Mr. Gandalf when he says, I wish that the ring had never come to me. And Gandalf has that quote about, so do all who live to see such times. But that's not our decision to make. Ours is to decide what to do with the time that was given to us. Make good choices today, gentlemen. Do your burpees. Kiss your wife. Hug your kids. Remember that Jesus is coming back. And however you go out with honor. Do brave deeds and endure.